Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, Episode 9, Armenia. We return to the Caucasus for the first recognized country in the region. Armenia is located at the crossroads of the Middle East and Europe, and could be argued to belong in either region. It borders the country of Georgia to the north, Azerbaijan to the east, Iran to the southeast, Azerbaijan again to the southwest due to the Azeri exclave, or a region that is completely separated from the mother country, Nakhchivan, and Turkey to the west. It also borders the unrecognized state of Artsakh, which is claimed by Azerbaijan to the east. It has an enclave in Azerbaijan, Artsakhan, which is currently occupied by Azerbaijan, as you will find out why later in the episode. The country is very mountainous, with large mountains being visible almost everywhere in the country. Armenia has a little under 3 million people in the country, with the majority of people, or 98%, being ethnic Armenians. Smaller ethnic groups include the ethno-religious group known as the Yazidis, who make up 1% of the population, along with Russians, Christian Assyrians, and Kurds. The Armenian language is the main language in the country, with the language being a unique branch of the Indo-European language family, and having its own alphabet and written script. Due to historical connections with Russia, many in the older generations speak Russian, although English is also popular among the youth. Religiously, 97% of the population belongs to the Armenian Apostolic Church. Now, the Armenian Church is wrongly considered to be an Eastern Orthodox Church, when in reality it was known as an Oriental Orthodox Church. Oriental Orthodoxy, while they share many similarities with Eastern Orthodoxy, are different, having different administrative structures, will speak different languages in the liturgy, and disagree about the nature of Christ. They tend to see Jesus as being both human and divine in one nature, while Eastern Orthodox, along with most other Christians, see him as both human and divine but in two different natures. Why does this matter besides me being nitpicky? Well, mainly I think it's interesting, but it'll also cause tension between the Armenian Church and the Eastern Orthodox during the first millennium, as you will see later on. Other religious groups include the Armenian Eastern Catholics, Protestant Christians, and the Yazidi ethnic religion. Before we begin talking about Armenian history, it's important to note that Armenia has historically included a large swath of land, known as the Armenian Highlands. This included large sections of eastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, parts of Georgia and Azerbaijan, and northern Iraq. This entire region had Armenians making up either a majority or a significant minority for thousands of years. However, for various reasons discussed later on, most Armenians would either retreat to modern-day Armenia or enter into diaspora in a variety of countries. Armenian history goes back thousands of years. The very first wine press and the first leather shoe in the world were found in Armenia, believed to be dated around 4000 BCE. Several cultures existed in the region during the early days of civilization, mixing with each other and neighboring kingdoms to form small confederacies. The first story associated with the founding of Armenia begins with the legendary warrior Hayk. Hayk is said to have led an army and killed the Babylonian god of war, Belus, thus freeing the Armenian people. And while this story is almost certainly false, the beginnings of Armenian culture and language began developing around the late 2000s BCE, with the country having to deal with foreign invaders from Babylon in the south. In 860 BCE, the kingdom of Urartu would be founded to combat the Neo-Assyrian Empire that would encroach from the south. Urartu would be the first major centralized state in the region and proved to effectively hold out against the Neo-Assyrians for several centuries. The capital of modern-day Armenia, Yerevan, would be founded during this time. Eventually, the kingdom would become a puppet state of the Assyrians before being invaded by the Median Empire in 590 BCE. Armenia would be ruled over by several empires, including the Persians, Macedonians, and Seleucid Empire, for a period of roughly 400 years, although they would often hold a large degree of autonomy. In 198 BCE, after the Seleucid Empire was decisively defeated by Rome, they would lose their grip on Armenia, resulting in an independent kingdom of Armenia to be formed. It was run under the Artaxia dynasty, who presented themselves as Hellenized or Greek-like kings. During this time, many in Armenia were Zoroastrian, due to Persian influence in the region, and Persia itself played an important role in Armenian politics. The ancient Armenian kingdom would reach its height under the rule of Tigranes the Great, from 95 to 55 BCE. The Armenian Highlands were divided among many small kingdoms and regional governors at this time. Tigranes would manage to either fully incorporate or establish a patron-client relationship with many of these small states. He would build up Armenia, constructing a capital city known as Tigranokerta that would become an important trading hub in the Middle East. He would defeat the Persian Parthian Empire, taking much of northwestern Iran, would crush the remaining Seleucids, taking much of Syria and Lebanon, and would force his northern neighbors in the Caucasus to become his vassals. Armenia reached its greatest territorial extent ever during this time. However, it would all come crashing down in the early 60s BCE. Tigranes would be married to the king of Pontus's daughter. Pontus, a kingdom in northern Turkey, was an important economic and political power in Anatolia at this time. The king of Pontus, Mithridates, would go to war several times with the newest regional power on the bloc, Rome, and proved to be a thorn in Rome's side. Mithridates would drag Armenia into a war, which Rome won, but only after fighting a long and brutal guerrilla war in the Armenian Highlands. Rome would allow Tigranes to continue to be king, and use Armenia as a buffer state between them and the Parthian Empire. Tigranes would continue to rule until dying at age 85. The Artaxid dynasty would enter into a decline after Tigranes, with Armenia falling under Roman influence. Eventually, in 12 CE, the last Artaxid king would be removed by Rome, with Armenia entering a new period of kings who would be appointed by either Rome or Parthia, who would rule for a few short years before being removed or killed by rivals. In 53 CE, the Parthian Empire would put his younger brother, Mithridates I, on the throne. This caused tensions with Rome, and in 58 CE, Rome with the support of several regional kings would invade Armenia. This would result in a 5-year war, with neither side able to effectively defeat the other. Eventually, it was decided that from now on, the Parthians would be able to pick who would become king of Armenia, but Rome would have to approve it. This would result in Mithridates to return as king, and form the Arsacid dynasty of Armenia. The Arsacid dynasty failed to restore Armenian power, however. It continued to be a buffer state, with it being conquered and divided several times. This cycle would continue until it was divided between the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantines, and the new Sasanian Empire in 387. The Arsacids themselves would be removed in 428 by the Sasanians. Also to be noted, the Armenian script was created at this time. Starting in the 40s CE, Christian missionaries would begin to start preaching to the people of Armenia. Slowly, more and more of the country began to become Christianized as missionaries like Thedatius of Edessa, Bartholomew the Apostle, and Gregory the Illuminator started building up the beginnings of the Armenian Church. Gregory would in 301 convert the king of Armenia, Mithridates III, to Christianity, and it became the state religion, making Armenia the first Christian kingdom in the world. The Armenian Church would remain connected with the Imperial Roman Church until the Council of Chalcedon in 451. When they split over those fairly minor by today's standards theological differences I mentioned at the start. Armenians would remain without a kingdom for several centuries. Armenian Christians in Persian lands would have to deal with persecution until Armenians rebelled and the Sasanians were forced to accept the free worship of Christians in the area. Armenia would be conquered by the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate in 651. They, and later the Abbasid Caliphate, would rule Armenia, albeit with a large degree of autonomy, until 884. A family of Armenian princes known as the Bagratids managed to wrestle Armenia out of Muslim hands and formed a new kingdom of Armenia. This state again acted as a buffer state, this time between the Byzantine Empire, the Muslim Caliphates, and the Saj dynasty in Azerbaijan. Bagratid Armenia wouldn't have the same centralized rule as the former Armenian kingdom, resulting in many local lords holding greater political power, and sometimes even breaking off and forming their own kingdom. The Armenians would establish a capital city at Ani in 961 that would become an important trading hub and would be known as the city of 1001 churches. As the years went by, the Byzantines, at the encouragement of the Greek Orthodox Church in Constantinople, would encroach further and further into Armenian territory. Plagued by civil wars and internal conflict, Armenia looked set to fall into Byzantine hands. Even though they defeated an invading Byzantine army in 1042, by 1045 the kingdom was under Byzantine control, along with all the other smaller Armenian states. Byzantine rule proved to be short-lived, however. Armenia's role as a buffer state had protected the Byzantines for years from invading armies, and Armenia could be a vital ally if needed. Without an Armenian state, the Byzantines were exposed, and in 1071 they were invaded by the Seljuk Turks, who decisively defeated the Byzantines and pushed them back to western Turkey. Armenians often point to this as an act of cosmic justice against the Byzantines, as Armenians claim they could have beaten back the Turks had the Byzantines respected their role as a buffer state. Regardless, the Turks rampaged through much of the land they conquered, including Armenia, depopulating the region. Many Armenians fled, including a Prince Reuben, who would form a new kingdom of Armenia, this time in the region of Sicilia in modern-day Turkey, in 1080. The kingdom would serve as a refuge for refugees fleeing the chaos in their traditional homelands. Armenian Sicilia would routinely fight with Byzantine lords in the region and would become a vital ally for the European Crusaders during the 12th and 13th century. They would establish close ties with Western Europe at this time before becoming a vassal of the Mongols in the late 13th century and being invaded by the Egyptian Mamelukes in 1375. The traditional homeland of Armenia continued to be depopulated by various invaders, and it became a place where local regionalized warlords ruled, often being vassals to larger states in the area. By the end of the Middle Ages, Armenia again entered a period of it being divided, this time between the Persians in the east and the Ottoman Turks in the west. The region would continue to be fought over, with periods of intense violence, followed by periods of relative stability. Some of the Armenians who had fled abroad began returning to repopulate the Armenian homeland, Both empires gave large autonomy to the Armenian regions, although talk of independence or political sovereignty wasn't tolerated. In 1829, Russia took over eastern Armenia from the Persians. Russia had been pushing into the Caucasus for several centuries, attempting to secure their southern border. The Armenians warmed up to their new Russian rulers, with many happy they were under Christian rule for the first time in several hundred years. Armenia was introduced to Enlightenment ideas, found themselves being more connected with the European world, and the start of Armenian nationalism began to emerge. Tensions would increase between the Turks and the Armenians after a war in 1878, ended with Russia occupying parts of eastern Turkey, which the Russians justified by saying they were protecting Armenians in the region. This led the Ottoman authorities to grow distrustful of the Armenians, and political persecution began. In 1894, after Armenians in the region of Sassoon began fighting back against Ottoman authorities and Muslim irregulars, the Ottomans decided to slaughter the Armenians in what became known as the Hamidian massacres, where 80,000 to 400,000 Armenians died. This resulted in what effectively became a period of asymmetric warfare in Ottoman Armenia, as bands of Armenians and Assyrians fought against rival bands of Kurds, Turks, and other majority Muslim ethnic groups, often with assistance from the Ottoman authorities. Several Armenian nationalist political parties were formed at this time, with the most famous political party being the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, or ARF. It supported left-wing nationalism and was strongly connected with socialist movements. It helped organize and participate in attacks against Ottoman authorities and worked closely with Armenians in Russia and in diaspora. The ARF still continues today, and is unique for being a party in multiple countries, with it having held positions in parliament in Armenia, the disputed Republic of Artsakh, and Lebanon. Ironically enough, it holds most seats in Lebanon and none in Armenia. More massacres and conflicts would occur in eastern Armenia up until World War I. Russia had joined the Entente while the Ottoman Empire had joined the rival Central Powers, with both nations sending troops into the Caucasus to try to fight it out, and take troops away from other fronts in the war. Many Armenians in both Russia and the Ottoman Empire hoped that a Russian victory would result in a free Armenia, or at least one with a large degree of autonomy, and thus many Armenians would volunteer in the Russian army or be used as irregulars. The Caucasus campaign would start with a Russian advance before being pushed back by the Ottomans. The Ottomans would attempt to drive deep into Russian territory in a daring winter assault, but were decisively defeated at the Battle of Sarikamish. It's estimated a third of the Ottoman army was wiped out, and proved to be disastrous for the Ottoman war effort in the region. At Sarikamish, Armenian volunteers helped the Russians win the battle. The Ottomans, furious at this failure, decided to take it out on the Armenians rather than blame their own leadership. On April 24, 1915, the Ottomans ordered the deportation and execution of roughly 250 Armenian intellectuals living in Constantinople. This is traditionally seen as the start of the Armenian Genocide, where Ottoman authorities would force Armenians, many of whom weren't involved in Sarikamish or the resistance against the Ottomans, on long death marches in the desert with little food and water before being taken to concentration camps where many would die. Others would simply be shot, sexually assaulted, thrown into the Black Sea, or burned alive. It is estimated between 700,000 to 1.8 million Armenians would die from these actions between 1915 and 1922. This resulted in the depopulation of the traditional Armenian lands outside of modern Armenia, and a massive exodus out of the region and into diaspora in countries such as America, France, Russia, and Lebanon. Two small side notes about the genocide. First, the Armenian Genocide is what is traditionally thought of as the first genocide. When the term genocide was being constructed after World War II, many looked to the events in Armenia as a framework for what constituted as a genocide. That being said, however, what happened in Armenia is undoubtedly not the first genocide, as ethnic cleansing and widespread violence has always existed. Secondly, it's important to note that even today, the genocide is not universally recognized, with only 32 states recognizing what happened as a genocide. Turkey today claims that what took place was either highly exaggerated or was simply just what happens during wartime. The war in the Caucasus would continue after Sarikamish. The Russians would advance as far as Erzurum in eastern Turkey, with Armenian troops often aiding the Russians. Ethnic violence became common not just in Ottoman Armenia, but also Russian Armenia, as Armenians began to grow distrustful of their Muslim neighbors, namely the Azeris, leading to raids, massacres, and pillaging across the southern Caucasus. In 1917, Russia, in the midst of a communist revolution back home, declared peace with the Ottomans, with the pre-war borders being re-established. Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan all decided in 1918 to try and organize into one central state, as the rest of Russia descended into civil war between the communist Reds, the conservative Whites, and an ungodly amount of other factions. This state, known as the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative Republic, would collapse just a few months later. with the three states breaking up into their own states as nationalist sentiment grew in each of them. The First Republic of Armenia at this time was surrounded by hostile neighbors, and war broke out among almost all of them. First, Armenia fought Georgia over the ethnically mixed territory in the north, which resulted in a stalemate. Azeris and Armenians had never really been on good terms with each other, and ethnic violence between the two had dated back before World War I. They fought over much of Nakhchivan, southern Armenia, and an ethnically mixed region known as Nagorno-Karabakh, or to the Armenians, Artsakh. This conflict would be especially bloody, with both sides committing numerous atrocities against each other. Finally, Armenia would also have to deal with a Turkish invasion in 1920 that took most of Armenia outside its current modern-day borders and severely weakened the state. By 1920, Armenia was exhausted from years of fighting, and when the Red Army invaded in November 1920, Armenia was unable to resist and fell under Soviet control. The Soviets, in an attempt to gain control of the region, offered to give Soviet Azerbaijan most of the disputed territory between the two states. When Armenians in Sunyk heard this, they revolted, forming the Republic of Mountainous Armenia in 1921. This state wouldn't last long, as it was disestablished by July of that year, but did manage to prevent southern Armenian land from being given to Soviet Azerbaijan. Armenia's entrance in the Soviet Union brought about a period of relative stability to Armenia. Ethnic violence was quelled and firm borders were drawn between the Armenians and other ethnic groups in the region. Literacy was increased and the local economy was built up. However, not all were happy with Soviet rule. The Armenian Orthodox Church lost most of its influence in the country for being too reactionary, with many priests forced to flee the country or go underground. Armenia did experience a period of migration from non-Armenians, as more Russians moved into the country to consolidate Soviet influence, along with the Syrians and Yazidis who were fleeing the Ottoman territory from persecution. During the years of Stalin, political repression increased. During World War II, Armenia served as a place where weapons could be produced, and almost 500,000 Armenians would fight in the war. Many Armenians hoped that by showing loyalty to the Soviets, they might consider trying to take the traditional Armenian homelands in the West. In Turkey, while there were still Armenians in the region, it was now predominantly populated by Turks or Kurds. Many Armenians who remained in Turkey became what is known as hidden Armenian, with them hiding their ethnic identity and trying to pass as Turkish. Estimates say that as low as 30,000 to as high as 5 million people in Turkey are considered hidden Armenians. After the war, the Soviets did try to pursue territorial claims on much of Western Armenia, but as the Cold War started and Turkey grew closer to NATO, the Soviets grew less interested in these claims. Towards the end of the Soviet Union, more Armenians began to criticize Soviet policies. Criticism was at first directed at the Soviets' ecological impact on the country and the lack of free speech, but eventually the criticism began to shift more towards Soviet repression towards the Armenian national identity and the church. Armenians and Azeris began to grow increasingly hostile towards each other over Nagorno-Karabakh. Starting in 1988, ethnic violence would rapidly increase, as there were several massacres of Armenians by Azeris, such as the Baku pogrom, and massacres of Azeris by Armenians, such as the Hojala massacre. I'll go into more detail about what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh in the next episode on Artsakh, but just know violence would break out in the area. The Soviets attempted to prevent the Armenians from attacking the Azeris, but by 1991 they had left the region and Armenia became an independent state again. By 1992, full-blown war had erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Fighting was brutal, as both sides were accused of numerous war crimes and ethnic cleansing by the other. Eventually, by 1994, Armenia along with the unrecognized state of Artsakh had defeated the Azeris, and a large section of Azerbaijan lay under Armenian control, while Artsakh was lost to the Azeris. Around 30,000 people died during the war. Almost all Armenians in Azerbaijan were forced into Armenian territory, and vice versa, leaving almost 1 million people displaced. The two countries today remain very hostile towards each other, with Azerbaijan and Turkey both blockading Armenia. This still hurts the Armenian economy and leaves only Georgia and Iran as countries that Armenia can trade directly with. Violence, while mostly over, does pop up from time to time. For example, in July 2020, conflict broke out along the border of the two countries, with at least 16 dead from both sides due to artillery fire and drone strikes. Armenia post-independence has dealt with authoritarianism similar to many post-Soviet states. The first 3 presidents of Armenia all jailed political opponents and were accused of rigging elections. In 1999, the Armenian parliament building was stormed by several gunmen, who killed the prime minister of Armenia at the time, Vazgen Sargsyan, along with several opposition members. The shootout has led to many conspiracy theories alleging that the president at the time, Robert Kocharian, had organized it to prevent the opposition from removing him, and to extend the war in Artsakh. Kocharian would continue to run the country until 2008. In 2008, Serge Sargsyan from the National Conservative Republican People's Party would be elected president. Immediately, his presidency was mired in controversy, as protests against the election result broke out, leaving 10 dead. Sargsyan's Armenia did slightly improve civil society in the country, although corruption was still rampant, and freedom of speech was restricted. Armenia would join the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, strengthening ties with Russia. The Republican People's Party was seen as being the party of power and looked unlikely to leave anytime soon. In April 2018, Sargsyan stepped down from the presidency, but immediately became the prime minister of the country, and transferred much of the presidency's power to him. This resulted in protests across the country against him, and the general state of politics in the country. The protests would result in Sargsyan stepping down less than a week later. Snap elections would be called, resulting in Nikol Pashinyan coming to power. Pashinyan comes from the broadly liberal Civic Contract Party, and has been involved in opposition politics in Armenia since the 90s. So far, he's tried to reduce corruption in the country, implement neoliberal economic solutions, and maintain good relations with both Russia and America. Right now, Armenian politics are believed to be headed in a direction where political opposition is to be respected and a meritocracy is to be established. However, it's also important to note that it's too early to see exactly where the country is headed, and back in May of 2020, there was an incident of Armenian lawmakers brawling with each other in the middle of parliament. So why does Armenia exist? Armenia is a country that has always historically been surrounded by neighbors who were either hostile or suspicious towards it. It has been invaded, subjugated, and been reborn many times throughout its history. Remember, the origin story of the country is a hero fighting a foreign war god. They are people who refuse to submit to foreign invaders. Armenia will continue to remain fiercely independent and proud of their country, no matter what, which prevents Armenia from ever being fully taken. Next week, we will go right next to Armenia, to the disputed country of Artsakh, and talk about the history of Nagorno-Karabakh. Prepare for, well, pretty much the same thing, just with an even greater emphasis on ethnic violence. Thank you. My email is whydocountries.exist@gmail.com for if you want to send your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day. The sources for this video are Ancient Origins article, Rise and Fall of Tigranes the Great, King of Armenia, Business Insider's video, Armenia's 250,000 person revolution, Caspian Report's video on Armenia-Azerbaijan skirmish, and origins of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Civil Net's video, Armenia Beyond the Revolution, Epimetheus' video, History of Armenia Summarized, Geography Now's video, Armenia, History Times documentaries, Medieval Armenia and the City of 1001 Churches, and The Lord of the Mountains, The Foundations of the Armenian Kingdom of Sicilia, International Encyclopedia of the First World Wars article on the Caucasus Front, Knowing Better's video, Denying Your History, Armenian Genocide, Mesa Man's video, The Untold History of the Armenians, Mr. History's video, Armenia, NAASR Studies video on George Bartunia's lecture on Tigranes the Great, the Great Wars videos, Transcaucasia in World War I, the Armenian Genocide, and a brief independence of Georgia, Armenia, the Great War. TRT World News video, Armenia and Azerbaijan Border Dispute Explained, TRT World News documentary, Black Orchards, Azerbaijani and Armenian Wars, and finally, Wikipedia.